In this case, we're going to be talking about it being applied to media and the way Nordstrom is organizing internally around that data and using it to leverage for media targeting. And then we're going to round out the morning by talking about hyper-personalization. So at least according to the ANA's recent research, which I have to say I doubt, they say, we love the ANA, but when they come in with figures that half of all brands they surveyed are bringing their media buying in-house, I'm a little doubtful of that personally, because as I talked to a lot of brands, and I think we heard some of them in the opening comments that a lot of you were sending me, not everybody is on board, and there are a number of brands that have actually gone in the reverse direction after trying the process of bringing media buying in-house. But one brand that has done it very effectively and very forcefully is Nordstrom. And we wanted to talk to Michelle Alfano, who's the Senior Manager of Programmatic Display at Nordstrom. She was brought into the company several years ago to start this very process of starting to moving them away from dependency on agencies to start to build the technology and bring the technology in-house that allows them to do the media buying. So please welcome Michelle Alfano. I want to start just by level setting, understanding media at Nordstrom. So give us a sense of the scale of digital media buying at Nordstrom. If not numbers, then give us a sense of where it fits within the larger circle of Nordstrom's media market.
I can't speak to numbers because that's just who we are. But yeah, we do a lot of media across in-house, or not in-house, out of home, digital billboards. We obviously are a fashion brand, so print is still important. I can't imagine somebody wouldn't be in vogue going into the fall season. But I would say for at least the full price business, which is the part that I sit on, we do have a separate team for off-price. Digital programmatic media is, a healthy portion of what we're doing. But I would say, we've gone through kind of a lot of iterations of going back and forth on the spectrum from promoted branded content all the way to programmatic and back, and I think we've found a happy balance at this point.
But we haven't seen a massive shift of dollars of late into digital. You've sort of settled on a mix that is pretty consistent.
We've been on a pretty consistent mix. We don't do TV, or haven't done TV since about 1999. So there wasn't a large bucket of dollars that wasn't as efficient in terms of what marketing was doing where we would shift into that. Digital marketing has, I think, been a constant component since about 2008.
And which channels are you tending to use in digital? Are you video, social, static display? What are the channels that really you're focused most on?
My immediate team is focused on video, display, and paid social. So we do cover KPIs all the way from branding and awareness down to demand driving and return on ad spend for retention campaigns. Being that we didn't have a TV arm or flex that muscle very often, we don't have a lot of video content, but we're wading into it. So I would say if you want to have rough percentages, we're probably 50-50 display and paid social with a little bit of a test budget in video, but it's been growing since last Q4.
Okay. Is a lot of it retargeting and as opposed to just straight overall branding?
We have a full funnel mix currently, which is part of why we made the move to bring it in-house, because we wanted to control kind of the message from a branding all the way down to speaking to our most loyal customers. So we do use a mix of pixel-based or first-party audience data, and we do that with our known customers, but then also bridging into lookalikes for any of those acquisition customers.
So let's get to that. Let's now get to that, to the meat of that. I just wanted to level set, have a sense of what Nordstrom actually does in the digital space.
Did I actually answer anything?
No, I got a sense. Let's talk about the basic decision to bring things in-house.
Sure.
What were the key drivers behind the decision?
Yeah, so I'll flip ahead to, I did some slides because it helps so I don't have to speak as much. But Nordstrom has really positioned themselves as being really true to the customer journey. You've probably heard it in any of the earnings calls about how we want to be thinking about our customer first. And that really drove, I think, the decision to flip marketing a little bit more in-house than what it had been previously. So having that transparency in technology, all the way from the customer audience list to our execution of that, and also knowing that we have a little bit of the online to offline hurdle, which isn't the easiest thing to translate to all of your agency partners when you're executing. Kind of really was the crux of why we decided to really revamp and change the entire way we thought about marketing to our customers.
Yeah, okay.
I was going to say, the other two pieces of that are privacy and the partnerships that we leverage. Obviously, our customer data is really near and dear to us. We value them, and we're not really willing to share that information out with a lot of partnerships. And so by bringing it in-house, we had more control over who we were deploying messaging to and what channels we were going through. I think everybody at some level thinks that moving everything in-house and having full control means that you get the absolute complete prescriptive way of going to sequential messaging and knowing the exact customer journey. We're definitely not there. No one is. I think what someone was saying yesterday, I don't know that you happen to see a Target TV commercial and then decide to go get back to school supplies, let alone the fact that you have a child and therefore need back to school supplies. But that kind of control a little bit more in that space around privacy of our first party audiences was the other piece. And then customization, I think everybody's iterated off of it today with the balance between AI and then also knowing who your best customer is. We balance that as well. There's a difference between serving you up the same pair of khaki pants because it's fall and you need a pair of khaki pants versus somebody saying that khaki pants are now in season. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I'm curious, since a lot of this is driven by the customer first idea. What do you know now about your customer that you didn't know then, that this has really made clearer to you?
I think we've been on a journey ourselves in figuring out our customer journey. In revamping kind of the way that we've thought about marketing and customer first, did a much better job of trying to collect data. We had a lot of really disparate data sources. I think there's probably a slide somewhere in our archives of all of the different databases and what they collected and how we didn't have a unified key to that piece. I think we're a lot further along that journey, and that doesn't even begin to touch on the fact that .com has a separate set of data than the personal stylists that are in store and work with that customer on a regular basis, sometimes more often than we would even know, with personal texts going back and forth about items they'd like to try on and pull into the dressing room for them. So that was a big piece of it, trying to digitize the in-store data, but also we have other brands that sister brands in the off-price business, and also with the acquisition of Trunk Club, it's a lot of data, and so trying to figure out who our best customers are and what's similar about them versus the folks that are a little bit newer to us versus those one-time purchasers. I think we've come a long way in understanding who our 5 core audience segments are and knowing that they are very different and distinct people.
Okay. So that was a part of it, is being able to segment that buyer into some of those fundamental segments of levels of interest and nature of relationship to the brand. When we were talking before, one of the things that you mentioned, and I think that's been echoed this morning too, is that one of the things that's let you do is to understand the why of your customer. And I think that's an important point. I'd like to spend some time on the why, because it echoes from something that we heard earlier this morning about the human element, that data is not human, it's not living, it's not life, I think Joyce said. And I think this echoes that as well, is understanding the why of a customer, that the data doesn't necessarily reveal that easily.
Yeah, to kind of go back to where we were previously and kind of where we are now, as opposed to all the messy steps to get there, we used to have probably 300 to 600 campaigns a year, which equates to maybe launching 1 or 2 every day. It's really hectic and messy. It was to target different categories, different brands, different product launches. The editorial calendar was all over the place. But when you think about who gets that message, those are a lot of messages, period. And so trying to understand why a customer would be intrigued by a brand launch versus just telling everybody about that brand launch was part of it. And so trying to get at why folks were motivated to come shop with us, whether it was because they were somebody who has a really high affinity for fashion and wants to be up on the latest trends versus I know I'm going to need new white t-shirts for fall because I've got to restock on those all the time, or a beauty buyer who has replenishment needs, and how those products potentially relate to each other. The other, common misnomer is that men do their shopping for themselves. It's actually much.
You just had to ask me.
Do you do your shopping for yourself?
No,
Steve?
I don't.
Yeah, a lot of time people who are buying men's products aren't actually men, and so just even understanding some of that gifting and that relationship within the household, but also, outside of that. There's a lot of whys, and the data's allowed us to see some of that, but at the same time, you have to craft the right story for each of those customer segments to explain why they're a one-time purchaser who might have needed a bridesmaid's dress versus a gift for somebody at Christmas. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Now, did you said that at one point you were doing up to 500 campaigns. Is that reduced?
Oh, yes.
So how and why? Is that, so you gained efficiency simply by understanding your customer better and no longer having to engage in this sort of a more scattershot approach where you were guessing who you were targeting or why you were targeting them. So tell us a little bit about how and where you actually reduced the number of campaigns through this process.
Yeah, definitely not me on my own telling you that story, but the brand team really has been the driver of content, and so knowing that we've got a lot more information about those 5 core customer segments and prioritizing the products or brands or categories that we're talking to them about has really reduced that number. So you can think about it in terms of we've got 5 core audiences that have potentially different affinities, but they can go under umbrella kind of campaigns with creative refreshes and different kind of taglines and messaging. Dynamic creative does a world of good in that space as well, but it really reduced the need for all of that production cost and specific outlining of these people bought this specific brand of purse, and then we're going to remarket them with ads for that brand of purse. They already have it. We know that. So what else would they be interested in, or what does that say about them that we can customize a much broader message that ends up getting personalized for them along the way. So the AI really helped enable some of that with dynamic creative, but also just kind of this understanding of who these core customers are and who these new customers are, which is a big pivot for us as well.
When you got the targeting that much tighter, did that mean you needed to contact them less often? Was it in terms of overall frequency, did you need less, or did you simply hitting them probably as much, but just with a much more targeted message?
I think if you look at it, it could be a change in frequency, but even if you and I are the same kind of shopper, I might need to be reminded way more frequently than you do. Or my cadence for browsing the site is potentially way more than yours. So we definitely look at those individual signals or those buckets of signals to figure that out. But it isn't as prescriptive to say that for 2 weeks we're going to be talking about this purse.
So even cadence is personalized?
Yeah.
So you're using signals from individual customers to get a sense of how often you need to talk to them? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about the ways in which you brought together this data, and because you said you had a lot of disparate data in a lot of different silos. Where did all of that data end up living? Let's talk about how it's organized internally, since as I think Andrew asked a point about various brands and different aspects of the company that have their own silos, often have their own P&Ls, they're not talking to one another. In this case, you had to start unifying all that internally. So tell us a little bit about that process, and I'm particularly interested in who ended up owning that. Where did it sit, and who controls it? Yeah,
there's a group that's dedicated to kind of marketing technology, but they roll up into the broader technology group, and so it's beyond us in terms of what we wanted to be able to do with that from a marketing perspective. But they've really championed and led the way, and that's been a gateway of cleaning up what we have access to from a marketing perspective. Does that make sense?
Well, so MarTech is actually a subset of tech?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. But marketing pretty much is controlling, is this a CDP that is sort of a customer data platform that you're using?
We have our own in-house customer data platform that we're leveraging in database, and then it gets onboarded or deployed for marketing channels through a partnership.
What process did you have to go through to assemble the tech and the data? That's the tricky part
It is
for a
the
lot
tricky
of brands
part.
is, do I really want to bring all this technology in-house? Do I want to have to deal with all of the vendors to do this? How much of it can I build myself? Where did you guys settle?
We went through an RFP process to kind of understand all of the tech in the space, the agency partnerships, the vertically integrated DMP, DSPs, I mean, to the three-letter acronyms, there's a lot of them to describe how you can handle and manage your data. That process got us down to a couple of partnerships, which we leveraged, tested out, and deployed. I think the big hurdle of where we started in 2015 with that process and where the space is now has changed. And so if you think about what a DMP was proposed to do in 2015 and what we're doing with audience segmentation and how you can do that beyond programmatic display and leverage audiences in a bunch of different ways has helped us change and morph. But yes, we don't build everything ourselves. It was a balance and trade-off of cost, resources, and just ability to find the folks that know how to do those things versus leveraging some of the smarts from technology providers that they built a company to support.
And how well they could integrate with systems you already had.
Yep.
How about pivoting away from them? I mean, as you said, this is a moving target. The technology is a moving target. And one of the anxieties that almost all brands have when it comes to bringing things in-house is they're tying themselves into technologies in a space that's ever-changing.
Yeah, not to flip to a side so I don't have to say it, but everyone can take a look at it. But flexibility was a really big part of what we were looking at. I need you to solve the problem for right now and maybe not give me the promise of the problem you're going to solve 5 years from now. And so having the ability to work with folks to solve the pieces of the puzzle that we needed them to has been really important in going through that whole process. So it wasn't about buying into an entire stack. It was buying into parts of stacks that would be flexible and transparent. The other piece is we do have a lot of things that we've built ourselves. In being in Seattle, I think we've got a pretty good hotbed and hub of folks who have experience at other different technology companies, and so we've had some pieces that are custom to us that we want to make sure that we're leveraging, and that partnership and willingness kind of on the tech company side has been really helpful because we're trying to create something that's really unique to us. And then I think, in terms of the other things we were looking at in RFP of how we got there was, that whole digital landscape. We weren't trying to solve the whole thing at once. So what was the priority and how were we getting through that? What is the minimum viable product versus the ideal state? We're always trying to work to a moving target of the ideal state. And then lastly, I think the features of currently available versus promise of being available is a really big question that we have to ask ourselves every time we're evaluating tech. So what can I do with this right now? Who's willing to put my needs on their roadmap? And how quickly does that roadmap actually get checked off and prioritized, even though they're not a company for us or working exclusively for us? And the beta and alpha opportunities too. We want to be first to market with a lot of different opportunities.
How are you managing that process internally? Because you've got a lot of different people throughout the company to whom this technology relates differently. They'll all have their own opinion as to which technology works best, serves them best. So when Nordstrom is coming out, is meeting with these vendors, who's the we? Who's bringing the set of, who's defining the task set or the tech set that they need? Because you have behind it all these different parts of the company that have their own priorities and their own needs and their own tastes.
I think the biggest thing that's helped is having a dedicated marketing technology platform group that works with us and ultimately rolls up into tech. Because we can't work in our own little silo and try to get things integrated with the website or with the various databases that have different walls of privacy without having some kind of leg into the tech world. But at the same time, it gives us dedicated resources to help prioritize my asks versus paid searches asks versus some of the things that we're trying to do across the board with, Facebook's coming out with a new beta or alpha opportunity every week. And while I would love to jump on every single one of them, I can't possibly create the creative content, let alone some of the data and technology integrations required for the audience segmentation or targeting. So we are doing the right message to the right person at the right time.
And how is that being, again, internally, how is this being, where were you getting the authority for all of the team members to have to play nice together so that this worked?
We do play nice together.
Yeah.
But I mean, yeah, there are definitely times where I would like to get something done in Q2 and everybody else has competing priorities. And so it's a matter of what is the speed to implement, what is the cost to implement, what is the groundwork and grunt work of bandwidth, and how do we prioritize that against each other. I can say I've had something on the roadmap that I could have probably gotten done by myself if I wiped off my entire to-do list last Q4. I'm still in the queue, but we're working on it for this upcoming Q3 and then into Q4.
But ultimately there was this MarTech team that had authority in the end to decide what the priorities would be among all of you in the various groups and say, look, you're just going to have to deal with the fact that you're not getting everything you want.
Well, yeah, okay. No one can get everything they want. I would also think that they're more of like a moderator, since they don't have really a stake in the game about who's innovating faster. They can't quite understand the impact of my needs without the data and the performance metrics that I would bring to the table to explain what the difference is between implementing a new piece of technology for programmatic media over paid search or something like that.
Now, I want to talk about segmentation a little bit. I think, did you all already talk about everything you have to say about segmentation when you talked about your 5 segments? Is that really what it came down to?
It doesn't.
Or was there more segmentation
Here, we'll skip ahead to, there's a whole bit that we wanted to talk about in-house about finding the right people, but we'll move past that to just kind of a high-level explanation of our audience segmentation. So, like I said, those 5 customer segments are there, but part of that is that we have people that are all along the stages of the life cycle with acquisition, retention, lapsed. I think you've seen it probably everywhere on the slides today, going from kind of top of the funnel down. But the other thing to think about is loyalty and non-loyalty. We do have a credit card. We do have a rewards program. Those folks behave differently. People browse the website. People shop in store. People go to our sister brands' websites. They've either are people who engage with ads or don't engage with ads. I can't make you engage with a display ad even as much as I want to. You might have previous purchases. You might be the kind of person that purchases 5 times a year or once a year for just a borderline need. But the 2 biggest things I think we've been able to see progress with, because all of that is our known information, and I can slice and dice that any way I want, is the customer location and weather aspect. And I know people talk about geo a lot, but we've really tried to loop in customer geo into kind of this digital landscape, either from our own information or information from partners, so that we can get things to the same degree of what the ad shows popular near you. It's more than saying winter coats are important in the Northeast versus sandals in Florida. There are certain seasonal and regional trends that until we had all these data points, and if anyone's staying for the Programmatic Summit the back half of the week, one of the guys on my team is going into this in great detail, so either tune into the recording or see him in person. But there's just so many things beyond just geofencing a store that are really important to product selection and customer behavior. I can't message to you about buy online, pick up in store if you're not near a store, but there are plenty of other things that make you an important customer segment that I can extrapolate off for other folks in that same kind of regional data set. Does that make sense?
Well, I think location's a really important point to drill into, and this came out in my conversations with you and Evan, Evan Brokus, who is our colleague who's going to be at the next summit. We spent a lot of time talking through what Nordstrom is doing, and the theme of location really fascinates me because I'm hearing this from other brands as well that are working local, especially a lot of the D2C brands that are moving into new markets. And one of the things they're finding is that location isn't just hitting people near a store. Yeah. It's the culture is different in different places. So when Nordstrom is advertising to people in LA, they have to think about a different competitive set that they're working with, a different set of geographies about where people are in relation to their stores. So there are a whole bunch of different parameters that need to be understood about location so that we're starting to understand that location isn't just another simple box to check off, that it actually means that these locations have very different characters.
Yeah.
And they require different creative, they require different mindsets, different types of targeting.
Yeah, I think it goes beyond saying if you're within a mile radius of the store, I'm going to bid you up 20% on your mobile device.
Right.
There are definitely a lot of pieces to glean from that, and I think we've got a lot of store locations, but I wouldn't necessarily say that the product offering in the Vancouver store is the same as the stuff that we're putting in stores in DC. And so if you think about that kind of personalization that retail's probably always taken a stance on when it comes to in-store placement, we're just trying to do that in a digital capacity as well.
I wanted to ask you a few questions about some of the bugbears that a lot of people have, with a lot of brands have when it comes to bringing things in-house, and a lot of the questions they often have about it. One is scale of buying and pricing, and whether you feel as if, I mean, a lot of people said, I think one of our comments in the beginning of the event said they still are getting economies of scale through their agency that they don't think that they could get on their own. What's been your experience in dealing with individually with platforms and publishers, and what you're able to achieve price-wise?
Yeah, there are probably definitely advantages in terms of rate cards and things to know with working with an agency. We do work with an agency from a high-level brand strategy perspective. I feel like we've been able to see incremental gains, and it goes kind of to, I think a little bit later what we were going to discuss about individual people, but just having the knowledge and expertise in programmatic buying. I have folks setting up private marketplace deals and different levels of that according to where it would be in the waterfall and the owned and operated through a particular DSP versus throwing everything into DoubleClick or something along that nature. It's really about how much work you want to put into it in terms of getting that kind of cost to where you need it to be. And it doesn't necessarily mean that it's always going to be because your agency has always worked with DoubleClick and therefore has a really reduced rate. I feel like we've been in a pretty good spot to negotiate when we need to make a difference between us buying through a particular venue or another because of that trade-off.
And then the other piece of this is the complexity of simply having to deal directly with all of these publishers and platforms. How do you manage that?
I mean, we have a team. It's not just one person doing it. And I think, to go through, I think what we were talking about yesterday with the unicorn people, I only want unicorn people. And if that means that we only are able to bring so much in-house versus leveraging some of the smarts from an agency or managed service partner, that's kind of been the road we've towed in terms of we're not 100% going into in-house. We think we can do it, but we will do it at the pace and ramp up when we are appropriately staffed to do that.
How is all this changing the economies of media buying and the budgeting and your set of expectations for what sort of advantages you're reaping from this and what the ROI is on bringing things in-house?
Yeah. I feel like we set a really high standard for ourselves, so we've always continually pushed the bounds of what the KPIs are that we're driving. We include pretty much every aspect or auxiliary cost when we're looking at that. But I also think it's just an attention to detail it's hard to put a price tag on when you don't have things that are erroneously launching or driving to a landing page that isn't the right landing page. And admittedly, that means that those agencies were wrong in terms of what they were doing for us. But I think it's just a matter of making the case for what the trade-off is between that managed service fee and having a person in-house that can provide that level of detail.
So net is the ROI on this in sort of intangible? You're maybe spending more, but getting other things that aren't measurable in return? Yeah,
I think there are some intangibles, but at the same time, I feel like we've definitely pushed the bounds on efficiency. And the other thing is no technology partner wants you to fail with their technology. They're always there to give you level insights that either they can't give you because of privacy, full data or dashboard access to, but they're some of the best stewards of their tool, and as much as we can use it and do that, I think, there's definitely an efficiency of not paying somebody a 40% markup.
Well, do you feel that you're really, and can you really see where you're gaining efficiencies and greater transparency, where more of your money is going to media, not tech, and not tech and markups.
Yeah.
Does this also address fraud? So in the general transparency equation, are there ways in which you really can tell that you're doing better than you were doing?
Yeah, we've kept a benchmark of performance for what we could see from a wholesale media cost perspective, but also layering in all of those fees as we've brought things on or in-house. I would say in the paid social space, we've been able to do that almost in a complete 180 from where we were 3 years ago. Display is definitely the more complicated space, thanks to the Lumascape landscape that we all have to navigate through from different partners in order to make those pieces work. Fraud is definitely another part of it, but I think in terms of what we've been able to do and bring it back to tying it to an individual customer level, that's something that I couldn't even have benchmarked because we weren't able to do that when we were leveraging the agencies.
So the biggest cost that that's usually entailed in bringing in-house is the staffing, and it's also the most sensitive and difficult part. You're essentially starting a business you didn't have before. So tell us about that process of how much you needed to staff up and how you were making those choices.
Yeah, I'm gonna go back one. So in terms of finding the right people, I'm sure everybody goes about doing in-house management at different paces, but we were really trying to crawl, walk, run our way in. And so it was about finding the right person or few folks that had the right mindset, could be good connectors between the brand strategy folks and the data scientist team that was doing a lot of these customer insights. And so I will say, like, we started out as a team of 6. We are still a team of 6. It's just been a trade for trade as folks have grown and either desired to go continue to work with agencies or work more on the branding side, and then filling the gaps with folks that feel the right puzzle pieces for that. So Evan, who will be here later, has been a really instrumental part in making sure that we've built out the display space in the way that we have. I don't think we would be where we are today if we didn't have the bandwidth and kind of headspace around how the supply chain of the display landscape works on the back end, and also the integration of audience and dynamic creative that he's been able to bring to the table. Had we not had him, we might have been leveraging somebody else to bridge that gap on a managed service basis until we could get there. And so, you know, everybody's got to have an understanding of the technical landscape and how to drive results and work through bidding optimizations. But really for us, why we bring things in-house and how we've transitioned that is by finding folks that can do both the right brain and left brain sides of digital marketing, and always want to be kind of where we are and where we could be going.
We have time for some questions. If anybody has any questions of Michelle. Yep, back here.
Paul Friedland. Thank you. Really, really insightful. Do you guys think you would have brought the media in-house if the creative was not in-house? Or I can flip that around and say, does part of it work because so much of your creative is done in-house, whether that's campaign or emails or visual, creative, copy, imagery, et cetera?
You know, I think it's been a journey in itself of getting creative kind of in a more programmatic space. I mean, they definitely have a breadth of assets for us to leverage, but to go from, I'm going to mock up something that's incredibly beautiful, fashion forward and art focused and curated, to giving up a little bit of that control in the creative department in order to be more customer centric. Creative is part of our broader marketing team, so when we're talking about being customer first and going after the customer, you know, with their best intentions in mind, it's been a journey for them too. I can't say whether or not it would have been easier or slower or a different process had we had to leverage an agency to give us those assets, but I think just having that customer first mentality has probably really helped them pivot as well.
Hi, it's Joyce Sudzik with AEG. I wanted to huge props for Nordstrom being first in the space, and it's more of a digital space that you've gone into as an overall brand compared to many of the retail competitors in the space that are struggling. As an organizational perspective, bringing it in-house, huge understanding of being digital. Do you see the company overall becoming more of a digital company versus a retail company? And how does that permeate through the entire employee kind of organization to be more digital first to make all of this work?
I'm probably not the best person to answer that on or off the record, but I would say, you know, in terms of what everybody has voiced either in the earnings calls or in the investor day that recently happened, you know, we are trying to be a digitally enabled company and think about all of the potential consumer touch points and not say that you are a mobile shopper versus a desktop shopper versus an in-store shopper. So kind of, again, meeting the customer first with what their needs are and knowing that that's across devices and across any kind of a landscape. You know, I think a lot of our offerings are pivoting to being digitally enabled as opposed to just being digital. And so does that help answer that question a little bit? Again, I would probably default to all of the things that have been said by the Nordstroms versus myself.
I'll chime in. The retail experience at Nordstrom is superior to almost any other merchandiser that I have seen. When you go into a Nordstrom store, the difference between the experience of just walking through that store physically is so much different than just about every one of the other anchor stores you'll see at any plaza or mall. It's open, it's inviting. You're not navigating the damn store. It's actually, you're discovering things as you move around. It's a real, I think that you guys really nailed the retail experience right now. I wanted to ask another thing about another agency function, which is discovering new technologies. I mean, once you build the stack, it's not set and forget, right?
Nope.
So there's the stack and the technology that you always need to vet, and traditionally agencies did that. But also these emerging channels like, you know, programmatic out of home, advanced TV, spoken word. I mean, smart speakers. All of these channels are emerging, and I'm curious: is that an internal function now, where you guys have to vet all those technologies yourselves?
It definitely is a balance. I would say, you know, we do our best to kind of stay up to speed on what the knowledge and pathway and the industry's doing and what kind of technologies are emerging that would kind of cover in our purview. So, you know, anything that kind of goes into digital video and programmatic TV I'm paying attention to, even though we traditionally haven't done TV. But like I said, we still are leveraging an agency from like a brand strategy perspective, and they're kind of covering that holistic media mix understanding and gap that we just don't have the muscle to flex ourselves yet.
In a year, when we have you back next year, where will you be, do you hope to be in this process, and what will you, how will it have advanced in a year's time?
So I can say my timeline on having my team fully doing all of the in-house programmatic media execution and optimization will probably be solidified in Q2 next year. So I hope my team is well balanced at that point. I can't potentially speak to kind of the mix of what they're going to be working on, because that's ebbing and flowing as the technologies are emerging or platforms are emerging. But I would think, like, by the time we get through next year, if anything, I think that this is still a journey for all of us. And so where we are from an entire marketing org and kind of the process and communication flow internally, we're still doing a lot of education, not only about digital platforms, but about audience segmentation and all the pieces that we touch. I think we'll be a little bit further along that journey. I don't think we'll be done.
Michelle Alfano, thank you very much.